All right. So, in the last couple examples, we were adding uh, interactor arrays, right? And we use them for teleporting. So we set up areas that we could use a teleportation anchor or even just a teleportation area so that you could, if you want to teleport along a plane on the ground or even zap yourself to particular spots. Another thing we could do with the ray interactors or even with a direct interactor, which we'll do in the next, not this module, but the next one, is we can have some simple interactions, okay? So for instance, here in this is scene 5, I have a white cube, a black cube, and I have a cylinder here. And what we're going to do is use the ray interactor to interact with these items here, okay? Now, if you remember in Interaction Design 1, way back in the day, we would have hyperlinks, right? So, for instance, let's say I'm going to go to google.com. I think it's TTPS. Okay. I'm going to preview this bad boy up in here. And so the hover effect is like, actually, here, let me do this real quick. I need some CSS, which means I need to have a full setup here. So I'm just setting up a very, 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 very basic web page, and I'm just going to add some CSS here. And let's set a color. And let's set a hover effect. Now, if you remember back from web development, hover is when you could change the visual design of something. So this is normally orange, and then I put my cursor above it, and it turns red, right? So you have a lot of websites where something, it may be adding like an underline or changing color or something. So that's what we call a hover effect. A hover means you're hovering above it. It doesn't mean you've actually selected it, though. Okay. So what's going to happen here is we don't have to engage with the item, but we're just sort of putting the rays on it. Okay. So I have this white cube, which is called hover interaction. And what we're going to do is we're going to add I already have the XR origin here with all the stuff on it. So it's already got the controllers. So we don't have to set that part up because we've already done that in another lab. And I don't feel like we need to go through the whole thing again. Hopefully you can look back if you need to set up your own from scratch. But now I have this item here, this cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a component to this object. And I'm going to add what is called XR simple interactor. Or simple interact, yeah, simple, XR simple interactable. Okay, I'm going to do that. And this is going to make this, wait for it, interactable. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is under interaction layer, I'm going to set this to everything. The reason why I'm doing that is this means what can interact with it. Now that could be a controller like Array Interactor, which we've set up. But it also could just be if you eventually, when you touch it with a direct, like a virtual glove or something, that would work. Now I'm going to scroll down to where it says interactable events, and it says hover and exit hover. Okay, so hovering is when you're above the object and you want it to change in some way. And then hover exited is when you're no longer hovering. Okay, so what I want to do in this case is I have this cube and I want to set, when someone hovers it, I want to change the color of it so that we know that it's like interactable as opposed to just like another object. So what I'm going to do is this object, has a material of just regular gray, and I'm going to change it to one of our other materials that we have, which is just red. Okay, when it's being hovered over. Okay, so what I'm going to do is click on this, and I'm going to go under interactable events. And I'm going to go under hover, and I'm going to click this plus. Okay. And this is going to allow me to decide which object is going to get affected when I hover over this. Okay. Because this is applied to this object, but technically you can affect a different object if you wanted to. We'll talk about that next. For now, we're not going to do that, but you could do that. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, when I hover over this object, I want this object, which is called hover interaction. I'm going to drag that there. And then under function, I'm going to go to where it says mesh renderer. And I'm going to go to where it says material. And what this basically means is that I'm allowed, when hovering, to change the material of this model. Okay. So which material do we want it to go to? Well, let's make it go to the red material. Okay. Now, if I were to save and preview this in the world, what would happen is the first time that I would interact with the cube, it would turn red, but then it would stay red forever. Okay. Now, the reason why is we told it to switch, but we have to tell it to switch back to the original gray material when we stop hovering over it. And we do that with the hover exited. Okay. So what I would do is click the plus sign here. This is what should happen when the user is no longer hovering on the object. I want this particular object to turn back to the gray material. So we'll take that object. We're going to go under the mesh renderer, and I am going to take that material, and we're going to set it back to gray. Okay. I'm not going to preview it yet, but if when I saved it, what should happen is when I interact with it with my ray interactor, it should turn red. And then when I stop hovering over it, it should turn back to gray. Now, like I said, you don't even have to affect that object. I could use the hover effect to affect a completely different object. So here I have this black cube called hover interaction other object. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add that simple ray interactor, and we're going to make sure that's set to everything so that both any kind of either a ray interactor or other object can affect it. And I'm going to go back to interactables, and I'm going to go under hover, and we're going to click plus, and I'm going to say, okay, when I hover over this, I don't want this object to change. I want this object to change. Okay. So what I'm going to say is, well, let's take the cylinder and let's change its material to, oh, I don't know, maybe purple. Okay. And then just like with the other one, when I stop hovering on this, I want this object to go back to its default, which is gray. So let's click plus, and we're going to set the cylinder, and we're going to set this back to the gray material. Okay. Now, that should be, I'm going to save it and preview it, and I'll switch over to my in VR perspective in a second. And when I do this, what should happen is when I point my ray here, it should turn red. That's the hover effect. When I click off of it, it should stop hovering and go back. And when I hover on this should change. And then when I stop hovering on this should stop. All right, everyone. So this is scene 5. This is about hovering and affecting something based on hovering. So hovering is just like hovering with web development, where the thing will change when you point at it. So I'm using my ray directors, and you can see this turns red when I hover over it. You can even use hovering to affect other things. So for instance, I have this black cube here. I actually set it when I hover on this, it's actually going to affect this cylinder. So when I do this, you can see that
it's affecting that. So hovering can be very interesting. You can use it to affect the item. This is kind of a user experience thing to let you know that something is, maybe interactable. Or you could use it to affect something else. And maybe if I point at something, it, makes, a billboard appear, or I could click on this and then maybe music happens or something like that. So these are just some possibilities that you could do.